If you're feeling bad after you eat, and here I'm talking about emotionally feeling bad, things like guilt, shame, or maybe you're not quite sure, not physically feeling bad, like digestive pain, then this is the video for you. I'm Cassie Christopher. I'm a registered dietitian and emotional eating expert, and I'm going to help you figure out what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and how you can heal your guilt and shame after eating. So, oftentimes, the women who come to me for help with emotional eating are capable, resilient, successful women who are committed to personal growth. They excel at everything they try, except for food. And that's led them to decades and decades worth of dieting and feeling inadequate and out of control around food. Perhaps you can relate. One thing these women often will say to me is that they wish they had more willpower and they feel a lot of guilt and shame and just generally bad that they're not having more control over eating. I think the best way to understand why you might be feeling bad after you eat is a quote from Brené Brown in her recent book, Atlas of the Heart. And she says that unwanted identity is the most powerful elicitor of shame. She says, if you want to know what's likely to trigger shame for you, just fill in this sentence. Ready? It's really important for me not to be perceived as blank. And if you're like most women I work with, maybe it's feeling undisciplined or lazy. You don't want other people to think that you don't have it all together. And what can happen when you are living in, or you feel like you're living into these identities that you don't want, is you feel shame. Now, Dr. Brown defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that you're flawed and therefore unworthy of love, belonging, and connection. Wow, no wonder you feel bad after you eat if you're feeling shame. It is intensely painful. And in particular, shame thrives on secrecy, silence, and judgment. And that's important to understand because if you're struggling with emotional eating, overeating, or just having trouble choosing foods that you know are healthy for you, then you probably don't want other people to know. You probably got the secrecy thing going on. I will often hear that women will, hide their chocolate bags, turn it inside out, hide it at the bottom of the garbage so their family doesn't know how much they ate in one sitting. Or maybe they will throw their trash away from the drive-thru before they get home so nobody knows again about what they ate. And that shame is really isolating. You believe that you are the only one who's suffering, that you have the problem, and if anyone knows about it, that'll be a really bad thing. So if you can resonate with anything I just shared, then you're likely experiencing shame. Another thing that may be making you feel bad after you eat is guilt. And the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicines defines helpful guilt as the feeling of psychological discomfort that occurs when we act in a way that breaks the objective standards of moral behavior. Now put a pin in that moral word, that's important. And there is unhelpful guilt, which they say is when we don't meet our unrealistically high standards. Now, it's certainly true that many of us have unrealistically high standards around food, like I will never eat another cookie again or never eat sugar again, right? And both types of guilt can apply to eating, but I'm going to argue that neither type of guilt is actually helpful when it comes to your relationship with food. And that's because eating isn't moral. It does not make you good or bad if you eat salad, an entire pizza, some cake, right? The response to guilt also is often to stop doing the thing that made you feel guilty in the first place, and you can't do that with eating. And I've often seen that people who are successful completely removing the food that makes them uncomfortable or completely avoiding it actually ends up creating more of a disordered eating situation where they feel obsessed about it and are always thinking about it, or they're afraid to go in social situations in case that food is there. So I really don't think using guilt or thinking guilt could be helpful is actually helpful with eating. So, if shame and guilt are unhelpful responses to eating that make you feel bad, is there any sort of helpful response? And I think that there can be, because difficult emotions aren't necessarily bad. And if you believe that all difficult emotions are bad, you're more likely to try to numb those emotions rather than feel them, which can get into, behaviors like emotional eating. So if shame and guilt aren't helpful, then what is? And I'm going to call this the self-compassionate oopsies. And this is when you eat in a way that doesn't align with your values and feels bad. Like, it doesn't feel good when you're not living up to your own values. But again, this is different from that unhelpful guilt because your own values are not, hopefully, unrealistically high standards. Noticing that you're out of alignment with your values is actually an opportunity, an invitation to get curious about why you're acting this way and to find a path towards healing. And the self-compassionate piece here assumes that you're going to be kind to yourself about it, rather than experiencing guilt or shame, which may lead to cycles of self-criticism, which leads to feeling poorly, which leads to wanting to numb that discomfort of feeling poorly with food, and then the cycle starts all over again. So how do you stop feeling bad after eating? Here are my 5 tips. The first is, if you notice emotional eating is a problem, and like we've talked about, that's numbing your feelings with food or using food as a primary source of pleasure, then you need to heal your emotional eating. And when you do that and have a healthy relationship with food, you'll be much less likely to feel bad after you eat. And if you want help with that, you can download my free roadmap, You're Done Dieting, but still want to heal emotional eating. The link is in the comments. The second thing you can do is to recognize that food isn't moral and remove that all or nothing language from your vocabulary. So labeling food as bad or good and you as bad or good as a result of what you eat actually makes you more likely to want to eat the forbidden food. So you get more of the feel-good neurotransmitter dopamine when you label foods as bad that motivate you to go eat that food. You also want to watch for all or nothing language. I call these my self-sabotaging words. So things like bad, good, should, failure, success, right? These can all be unhelpful for creating a healthy relationship with food because they create this environment where in order to, be a success and be good, you have to do everything perfectly, which I would argue is an unrealistically high standard. Nobody eats perfectly. So consider adopting the philosophy that all food has a place and there's no such thing as bad food or failing at eating. My third tip for you is to share your struggle with eating in a safe environment. Brené Brown says that the antidote to shame is empathy. And if we reach out and share our shame and experience with someone who responds with empathy, then shame dissipates. It cannot survive when you get empathy from other people. So finding a safe place to share your struggles with, finding empathetic people is one way to really stop feeling bad after eating. I invite you to join my free private Facebook group, the Emotional Eating and Women's Wellness Community, where you can come and talk about your struggles and see that there's almost 5,000 other women struggling with the same exact thing. The link to that is in the comments as well. The fourth tip I have for you is to practice self-compassion. So accepting that you're struggling rather than judging yourself harshly for it, responding kindly is a powerful tool when you're determining why you might feel bad after eating. So here, I recommend you ask yourself the question, what would my best friend say to me in this situation? And say that to yourself rather than what's likely a more self-critical comment. We already talked about what happens with the self-criticism. It just ends up leading to more eating. And the fifth tip here is to calm your nervous system. A lot of your food struggles are likely coming from an activated nervous system that's driving some powerful cravings. You really can't fight your, stress hormones and your nervous system. They're going to win every single time. So to find out what might be activating your nervous system and what to do about it, I again recommend that you download my guide, You're Done Dieting but Still Want to Heal Emotional Eating. You'll get all the information you need there. Like, subscribe, let me know in the comments if this was helpful to you and what your takeaways were, and thanks for joining me.